Hello. I was asked this weekend just to come on and do a video regarding the structure of the poetry answer for both higher and ordinary level. Now, it's only going to be a really short video because there's not an awful lot to discuss if you're familiar with paper 2 and you are familiar with the kind of questions that you'll be asked with regard to each poet. So let's just take this question as an example. From your study of the poetry of Adrienne Rich on your course, select the poems that, in your opinion, best demonstrate her effective use of symbols and metaphors in exploring the themes of power and powerlessness. If you are in a hurry and you're watching the clock, you are going to do what so many students do, and you're going to read that question, you're going to skim it, and you're going to see Adrienne Rich, Power and Powerlessness. And then you're going to proceed to talk about power and powerlessness as present in her poetry. And unfortunately, your marks as a result would be severely depleted. What I recommend doing initially is taking a highlighter or a pen and underlining all of the different things that you're asked in any given question. For example, best demonstrate her effective use of symbols and metaphors. You must address symbols that she uses in her poetry. You must address the metaphors that she uses in her poetry, and you must discuss whether they are effective or not, and whether they are effective in exploring the dual themes of power and powerlessness. Now, for anyone here who has studied Adrienne Rich, you will know that power and powerlessness dominate so much of her poetry. I will devote a whole thread or video rather to Adrienne Rich and her poetry this coming week. I'm very aware that for many of you, your mocks are about to begin. Some are beginning in or around the 12th or 15th this month, and the majority of you are starting next month. So it's my hope to have covered a huge amount of the poetry syllabus between now and then. But it's also worth noting that going into the mocks is a preparation. It really isn't anything to lose sleep over. It's not anything to stress over. And particularly for your parents to be aware, it is not an indication of the grades that you're going to come out with in June. It is a mental and physical preparation for the kind of stress that you're going to be putting yourself, your mind, and your body under. It's nothing more than that. So to go in there, you take out your highlighter, you underline what's being asked of you. And if you have time, plan. You're not going to have much time. You have 50 minutes to get your studied poetry question done and dusted. You must have a minimum of 4 A4 pages. If you have anything less than that, your marks will be deducted. So I would be looking at a departmental requirement, a minimum of 4 poems. I would be advising you to do your best to answer on 5. To answer a poetry question, you need a decent introduction, not this tick the box, I've done an introduction from my study of such and such, don't give that nonsense. You may as well leave that area of the page blank because it does nothing to the value of your answer. What you are doing in the introduction is you're giving the examiner confidence in your ability. Confidence in your ability will come from you showing the examiner that you understand what the question is, you understand what you're being asked, and that you have a plan that you're going to put forward in the remainder of your answer to show what your knowledge is of this poet with regard to this question. And that is important. You're not just going in there to pour out everything you know about that poet onto the pages. It is relevant to this question. So please, please, please go in knowing your poet, but answer the question and all aspects of the question, not just the part that you see when you're reading in a rush. So number the things that you're being asked or highlight the things that you are being asked. In your introduction, an example of what you might say would be something along the lines of Adrienne Rich is, predominantly a strong poet in how she addresses those who are powerless in society. And she addresses how one or more members in a marital union can feel powerless at times. Quite often marriages fail because there is an abuse of power from one over another. And this was well documented in her poetry right across the board. She did wonders for feminist writing. She did wonders for the emerging female voice in poetry. It's worth talking about that in your introduction to show that through the use of, for example, in this case, metaphors and symbols, she did give a voice to those who were navigating the waters of power and powerlessness. And therefore, you are setting the scene for what's going to be the main body of your answer. I advise anyone going into their mocks to take one poem per paragraph. At all times, you link every aspect of that paragraph back to the question. Do not fall into the trap of giving a summary and a one-liner at the end that says this links to the question. Allow yourself to have a genuine point to prove. When you have completed that paragraph and you move on to your second poem, fluidly link. Do not have one poem and then you leave that poem, and then you say, in such and such a poem, and then you give that summary. That's ridiculous. You are not being asked to give 5 summaries. That is not what's being required of you. If you do that, you will lose marks on your purpose, you will lose marks on your coherency, and you are doing yourself a genuine injustice. So what you want to do there is fluidly link. So whatever point you have suggested in your first poem, you are going to take that and the reference to the question, you're going to drag it into your second point, and you're going to say this idea is mirrored in whatever poem it is, and you will continue on that way. Use I as much as possible, because it is your opinion that matters. It is your viewpoint and your understanding of this poet. Poetry is a very, very personal experience, and an examiner does genuinely reward a personal experience and a personal impact, because then it shows an examiner that you are a Leaving Certificate student who has genuinely benefited from what you have studied, and that it's not a case of you were forced to learn it, here's your answer. You have something new to bring to the table, and examiners do genuinely appreciate that. So for your own sake, try and approach it from a human aspect. I was asked how many quotes should be in each. If you are one of my students, I am of the belief that you should have every poem learned off. It is not as terrifying as it sounds. You take a poem a week, you will have them all done, right? 6 poems by 6 poets, 36 poems, but I'm very aware that most of you are not going to do 6 poets and probably not 6 poems either. But realistically, you have to know 5. It's insane going into your Leaving Certificate out of a possible 8 poems, or 8 poets rather, learning anything less than 5. So you need to know at least 5 poets, and you need to have 5 poems by 5 poets. You can learn those off very, very easily. So if you're looking at a question of how many quotes should be in them, I would be saying avoid the large chunks of quote. Try and pepper them throughout. So if you can have 2 words on this sentence, 2 words on the next, then 1, then 3 further down, it gives your answer a richness, and it allows your quotes to feel fluid and a genuine part of your answer, as opposed to everybody learning off the same 2 or 3 quotes per poem, and you don't give yourself any room for any question that might go outside the expected. But if you have to choose certain quotes, then I probably would be looking at around 8 quotes per poem, depending on the length of the poem, and you'll be able to judge that yourself. Adrienne Rich's poems do tend to be quite long, but I wouldn't ever be presenting anything less than 8 quotes per poet, or per poem rather. So if that's the case, it's in your best interest to reduce stress and actually learn the poem off. Learn the poem off. What it does, I suppose, is it allows you to connect on a human level with that poet. And you're not torturing yourself trying to learn off a selection of his or her quotes. You're making the effort to understand them. This is their heart and soul poured onto the page. So you're giving them the respect of learning off what they have said to you, rather than stressing over, 6 or 7 or 8 quotes. You're actually making the effort to learn their words and learn their poems. It's the greatest respect you can give to a poet, and it is the greatest help you can give to yourself when you are walking into your exam. You need to link from poem to poem to poem 5 times. That is the body of your answer. You always conclude your poetry answer with a conclusion. The conclusion, rather, is a summary of what you have said throughout. It is a reiteration of where you stand with regard to the question, and it gives you an opportunity to personally engage for the last time to the examiner. Bearing in mind, it is the last thing the examiner is going to read before they award you a grade for that question. So try and make it real. Try and make it something that will impact the examiner, affect them on an emotional level. And above all, you want the examiner to remember that you are a person. You have opinions. You have interpreted the words of this poet in a way that nobody else ever has. And that deserves a decent grade. So don't let your hard work go unnoticed. Don't fire down summaries on a page and hope for the best. You do yourself the best service by learning off those quotes, by personally connecting on a human level with that poet, by thoroughly reading and understanding what is required of you from the question, taking your time, and never, ever, ever handing up less than is required of you, regardless of what odds you're stacked against. I have made this point many, many times, but take off a watch when you walk into your exam, put it down beside you, and know your time management. There is no point in persevering on the studied text for, say, for example, Hamlet, for more than an hour, because you're taking that time away from the comparative study question. It's not worth it. You stop at the allotted time and you move on. 4 questions answered 3/4 of the way is much better than 2 questions completely answered and 2 undone, right? It is the best possible scenario you can do. If you run out of time, it's the best option for you. I will discuss this in more detail, but I do genuinely welcome any questions, any comments. If you have a particular query or worry about some of your work or some of the challenges facing you, feel free always to comment here or to send me an email on tremoretuition@gmail.com, and I will always come back to you. All right. Thank you so much. And as I said, if you do have any questions, you can contact me. All right. Thanks a million.